On the 19th of July, 1848, the first Women's Rights Convention began in Seneca Falls, New York. They found themselves unable to participate in anything that was deemed to men, and some women were inspired to take up the fight for women's rights. Although some men did attend this convention, the first day was exclusively only for women. The Declaration of Sentiments included 12 resolutions by 68 women and 32 men that were voted on the next day. All the resolutions were approved except for one, which was demanding for women to be given the right to vote, which had been included by Elizabeth Stanton but was opposed by Lucretia Mott for being too controversial. Others in the inclusion shared that it could undermine their efforts for equality. The resolution found support by Frederick Douglass. He was the only African American in the meeting. The increasing demand for a united front and the struggle for women's rights led to the creation of the National Women's Rights Convention. It was formally started in 1850 and originated from Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. The founders envisioned a platform for women to talk about not only equality but a range of concerns affecting their lives. For the women's rights movement to have a clear objective and a set of guiding ideas, the early conventions were important. Leading the first convention was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who, with Lucretia Mott and others, established the framework for future talks. Stanton's address to the women of the United States established a strong persistence by arguing against social conventions that restricted women's freedom and fighting for their right to vote. The convention had over 300 people in attendance.
Wait, who are they?
Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton?
Yeah, them.
One woman who advocated for women's rights in the 19th century was Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was a homemaker in Seneca Falls, New York. She grew up highly educated and enjoyed a political life before settling down for her family. But Stanton did not like the idea of being a wife and a mother for her 7 children. She always wished for a life outside the home. She ended up finding it within a group of women that wanted the same things as her, which included Lucretia Mott. And Mott and Stanton had met years before at an anti-slavery convention in London, but they were both denied access due to them being women. Lucretia Mott remained active in both the abolition and women's rights movements. She continued to speak out against slavery, and in 1866, she became the first president of the American Equal Rights Association, an organization formed to achieve equality for African Americans and women.
Yeah, they're very interesting women and had a huge impact. Their willingness to want to change started a movement that would change the way of history.
The Seneca Falls Convention was the first time women demanded for a change, and it caused quite the stir across the country. Many newspapers mocked them. They called them dull and uninteresting, and as well as insane and ludicrous. Negative comments were impacting some of the women who had signed the Declaration of Sentiments. Several went as far as withdrawing their names from the document and joining the opposition, but that didn't stop the convention and only inspired them to continue working harder to achieve their rights.
The conventions became more common for the movement and the debate as they went on. African American feminist and women's rights activist Sojourner Truth made a powerful address to the Akron Conference in 1851. Her strong remarks in Ain't I a Woman brought attention to the connections of the gender and race, which helped to encourage a more welcoming conversation within the movement. Discussions at the conventions covered a wide range of subjects. Marriage rules, property rights, and women's access to education were among the main topics of discussion. Susan B. Anthony became a prominent figure, stressing that achieving universal suffrage was essential to tackling wider gender disparities. Women's suffrage newspapers and journals began to flourish during the conventions, adding to the movement's visibility.
In the middle part of the National Women's Rights Convention, things got really interesting. They started in 1850 and went on to tackle a bunch of different problems. In 1853, they even formed a group about not drinking too much alcohol. Education became a big deal. People talked about why women should get to go to college and not face so many barriers. Lucy Stone in 1855 spoke up against the tradition of women changing their last names when they got married. During the Civil War, they took a break, but when they came back, they were fired up. In 1866, they met in New York and said women needed the right to vote to make laws better. Susan B. Anthony became a big leader fighting for both women's rights and to end slavery. In 1869, in Washington, D.C., they formed the National Women's Suffrage Association, NWSA. Now they weren't just talking, they were planning how to change laws. They also started newspapers to spread their ideas, so in the middle part, the conventions were like a mix of talking about big ideas and figuring out how to make things happen. They set the stage for more changes to come.
As the National Women's Rights Convention wrapped up, things took a different turn. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, they started talking about more than just voting. In the 1890 meetings in Washington, D.C. was a big deal. They began discussing workplace rights, divorce laws, and how to make sure women had economic freedom. By 1913, women were getting smarter about politics. The convention in D.C. happened right when Woodrow Wilson became president. Activists like Alice Paul and Lucy Burns started doing marches and protests, which was a big change from just talking. All this hard work paid off in the 1920s, when the 19th Amendment was passed, letting women vote. The convention didn't continue, but they set the stage for women to keep fighting for more rights in the years to come. The Seneca Falls Convention was a pivotal moment. It was a declaration beyond its time, demanding change.
The convention wasn't just a historical event. Its spirits live on in every woman who raises her voice against injustice.
It acted as an inspiration for understanding and educating people about the fundamental rights of women.
The conference served as an inspiration for more movements, ranging from suffrages, marching for the right to vote, sports, and other places, but there's still a long way to go until equality is achieved today.
Although we've come a long way, issues including social biases, pay inequality, and gender discrimination still exist today. These factors still have an impact on the modern world.
Women's rights aren't just a women's issues. It's about creating a world where everyone has equal opportunities in it.
Educating the next generation is our duty, and making sure that they never forget what these women did at the Seneca Falls Convention.
The fight for women's rights continues from Seneca Falls to the international arena. It's something that our culture has to do and accept. It's also a march towards a day when equality is not a goal but a reality.
Their words reflect in our actions as we stand on the shoulders of those who had to dream, motivating us to keep moving forward in the direction of a society in which every woman's rights are definitely recognized and respected. The Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention served as more than just a meeting. It was a spark that sparked a movement. Protests calling for equality across the country rose in its result. As we notice what happened because of this historical event, the persistence for those who fought women's rights became a lot more evident.
The convention set off a lot of demonstrations and a wave of voices judging social norms and calling out for gender equality.
These demonstrations acted as a statement asking for a society that doesn't tolerate injustice towards women.
Protests occurred everywhere, from big cities to little villages, showing the need for change. Refusing to be ignored in their fight for equality, women and supporters took on the streets.
By bringing attention to urgent needs for change, these protests brought societal and legislative improvements.
They pushed the status quo and made society face hard facts, sparking discussions that changed people's opinions about women's rights.
They gave hope to a generation, laying foundations for upcoming movements and stating the need to stick together in the pursuit of equality.
The convention set off a lot of demonstrations and a wave of voices judging social norms and calling out for gender equality. The memory of those who stood at Seneca Falls lives in the protests that are taking place around the world today, from suffragists to current activists, the struggle remains, changing to meet fresh challenges and goals.
Nevertheless, the protest's impact persisted over the years, serving as a call to action and a reminder that the struggle for women's rights is still being fought. The conference was a continuous event. Its impact can be heard in the continuous global struggles for gender equality.
Every step we take today honors the courageous individuals who assembled at Seneca Falls and serves as a reminder that change is achievable when joined together.
The spirit of Seneca Falls lives on not in just history books, but the resilience of every individual striving for a fair and just world.